Around 250 years and 1,000 miles separate the peculiar thinkers on which this talk is going to focus, Dominicus, Gundissalinus and Nicola of Cusa. While the latter is surely one of the most original and important thinkers of the Renaissance, Gundissalinus is a rather unstudied and often forgotten character of that philosophical revolution taking place between the end of the 12th and the beginning of the 13th century. Living in different times and places, both Gundissalinus and Cusa are eminent witnesses of the exhaustion of shared philosophical traditions and the very construction of new frameworks and theoretical landscapes. In addition to this, both Gundissalinus and Cusa had a special attention for an intriguing author of the 12th century, theory of Chartres. The profound influence Thierry's works have had on Cusa has been brilliantly examined by David Albertson, and it can be said that Thierry is one of the most important sources of Cusa's mathematical approach to the philosophical study of reality. As for Gundissalinus, recent hypotheses have proposed a direct and personal link with Chartres. Finally, there are traces suggesting that Cusa had direct knowledge of at least one work authored by Gundissalinus, his De Unitate et Una, to which the German philosopher refers twice in his De Venatione Sapientiae. In doing so, Cusa follows the manuscript tradition and the pseudepigraphical attribution of this work to Boëthius, without displaying any knowledge of Aquinas' refutation of this eventuality. Considering that some manuscript witnesses of Gundissalinus' works are dated to the 15th century, it might be asked whether Cusa had a wider knowledge of this author, and if Gundissalinus' reflection influenced Cusa's philosophy. My talk, though, does not engage with such hypothesis, whose elaboration would require a preliminary thematization of scopes, methods, and approaches to the main philosophical problems dealt with by both Gundissalinus and Cusa. By this point of view, today I will focus on a special topic, which is the doctrinal tension between two basic metaphysical concepts of the Aristotelian tradition, matter and possibility, in order to examine the different strategies and outcomes of Gundissalinus and Cusa. There is no need to underline that this is a first approximation to a theme that would possibly be worth exploring more at length. As I mentioned before, a point shared by Gundissalinus and Cusa is the importance they bestowed upon the reflection by theory of Chartres. Theories such as the identification of the three Trinitarian personae with the arithmo-ontological concepts of unity, equality, and connection, and the model doctrines of the Rerum Universitas are among the most striking points proposed by theory, which would have an intriguing history of the effects. Unity and oneness are radically different from alterity and multiplicity. Proper of the entirety of creatural beings, multiplicity is opposed to the simple and complete unity of the one, and yet originally bound to it. Alterity, which is the very ground from which multiplicity arises, descends from unity, likewise mutability descends from immutability. For these reasons, alterity always requires unity, both logically and ontologically, and therefore it corresponds to mutability itself. In his commentary on Boëthius' De Arithmetica, theory goes a bit further and explicitly identifies the principle of alterity with number 2. Following Boëthius, theory stresses the relevance of number 2 as the first entity to be detached from the utter identity and simplicity of God's oneness. In fact, alterity can be said only of two different things which are alter to each other in their individuality. Therefore, duality must be the principle of alterity or principium alteritatis. In other words, going back from numerology to ontology and cosmology, number 2 or duality is the first manifestation of the explicatio of the universe from God, the origin of the plurality of beings which were complicated into him as oneness and identity. In the commentum on Boëthius' De Trinitate, the ontological value of alterity is expressed by matter, the principle of mutability, previously identified with alterity itself. From this perspective, matter is the origin of mutability and alterity, which descends from unity and works as subject of the multiplication of the forms corresponding to the institution of the universe. Consequently, matter explicates as possibility what is complicated into oneness. There is no need to say that theories A theory of matter goes beyond these preliminary points. What I would like to stress, though, is the link between alterity and matter as the logical counterpart of God's oneness. Consideration on whether this counterpart is also ontological, and in what sense, marks the opposed receptions of these points by Gundissalinus and Nicola of Cusa. Gundissalinus' De Processione Mundi engages with an analysis of the universe as regards to its institution and ontological composition. Following Al-Farabi's metaphysical procedure, as described in his De Sciences, Gundissalinus deals with, in order, the existence of God as being the creation of the two principles of the universe and their peculiarities, the secondary cause and its role for the institution of the sensible universe. Gundissalinus' syncretism toward the Latin and Arabic traditions is very strong, and that his description of the cosmic institution is a sort of merging of opposed perspectives from both traditions, being Gundissalinus not only a philosopher but also an important translator from Arabic into Latin of works by Avicenna, Al-Farabi, and Avicebron, among others. Following these Arabic and Latin sources, Gundissalinus describes God as absolute oneness, similar and yet different to the being proper to creatures, which are always one, for being one are always correlated in existence, but in a derivative sense. Creatural oneness, indeed, is always a unity of two different entities, which become ontologically one when they are united. These components are matter and form, the principles of creatural existence following the doctrine of universal hylomorphism. Gundissalinus' justification of this ontological duality appears to be grounded upon Thierry of Chard's discussion of unity and alterity. Gundissalinus indeed claims in his De Processione Mundi that, I quote, "For the Creator created some principle, but every created thing must be different from the Creator. Indeed, since therefore the Creator is truly one, something created certainly ought not to have been one. But just as there was nothing in the middle between the Creator and the first creature, so there is nothing in the middle between one and two. For the first thing that is different from one is two. Since therefore the Creator is truly one, the creature that is after him certainly had to be two, for diversity is not found in oneness but in otherness. But the first principle of otherness is two-ness, which first departs from oneness. If therefore the first created thing were one, then there would be no diversity. But if there were no diversity, there would be no universe of creatures that was going to be. Therefore, two simple principles from which all things were to be constituted had to be created first by one simple principle." End of quotation. Gundissalinus clarifies that the first created things must have been two in number, or better, a duality. In fact, since the first principle of alterity is number two, as it is the first entity to recede from unity, if the first created things were one single entity, nothing of the plurality of creature would ever be. Therefore, a duality is necessary, and this duality expresses both derivation and difference from the absolute unity, which is God. As I was saying, this duality is expressed by the two hylomorphic principles, not matter only. Indeed, Gundissalinus' interpretation of hylomorphism is extremely peculiar, far beyond the admission of its universality. On the one hand, Gundissalinus agrees with the many fundamental points of the philosophical tradition. Matter is the passive subject of the formal reception, the bearer of forms, and its existence is directly related to the form as its cause, since it is the form rather than matter to actualize the compound. On the other hand, though, Gundissalinus reverses many other Aristotelian characteristics of the hylomorphic dynamic, starting with the equivalence between matter and potency and form and act. Both matter and form are in potency before being joined together, and they receive their actual existence only within the unity of the hylomorphic compound. The reasons of this peculiar doctrinal point reside in Gundissalinus' aim to merge two ontological theories, Avicenna's universal isomorphism and Avicenna's model ontology. On the one hand, universal isomorphism claims that the root of the difference between creator and creatures consists in the hylomorphic composition of the latter. Every creature is composed of matter and form, while God is neither matter nor form. On the other hand, Avicenna's model ontology claims that the difference between creator and creatures is based on the opposition between the complete and absolute necessity of God, that is, his complete self-sufficiency, and the absolute contingency of the creatures. Whose being is possible, that is, may well be or not be. The institution of the universe corresponds to the coming forth into being of that possibility, a causation through which the creatures receive a derived necessity, becoming necessary being per aliud, that is, through a cause. Gundissalinus' synthesis is based upon the equivalence between possibility and potency. Every creatural being, before coming to be, is possible. It is in potency, and this possibility of existence is the potential state of both matter and form. Once the creature has been brought forth into existence, it has a necessary being per aliud. Its being is actualized through the union of matter and form. By this, the ontological dynamic of the creatures is developed through the terms of potency, possibility, and act, necessity, proper to the duality of matter and form, and which is caused by the complete necessity of God's oneness, who, consequently, is neither potency nor act. Going back to the principle of alterity, it is clear then why this must be the binarius, that is, correspondent to the number 2. Alterity and multiplicity, in fact, are caused by the duality of matter and form, which in turn express the potency and possibility of the universe, although in different ways. Opposed to this, God's unity is necessity per se, and its ontogonic power does not entail any possibility or potency understood as the alternative between the possibility of existence and non-existence. Passing to Nicola of Cusa, one might register that the positions he presented in his Deducta Ignorantia could not be furthest away from Gundissalinus. Nevertheless, Cusa too departs from a very similar consideration derived by theory of Chartres. Introducing the doctrine of unitas, equalitas, and connexio, Cusa reaffirms that multiplicity must be posterior to unity. Multiplicity, indeed, is derived from alterity. I quote from Cusa's text. For otherness is identical with mutability. Now everything which naturally precedes mutability is immutable and hence eternal. But otherness consists of one thing and another. Hence, otherness is subsequent to oneness, just as is a number. Therefore, oneness is by nature prior to otherness, and since oneness naturally precedes otherness, it is eternal. End of quotation. Alterity corresponds to mutability, and mutability is preceded by immutability, that is, eternity. Likewise, alterity is preceded by unity, which therefore is eternal. Going ahead with this argument, Cusa introduces a third term, which is inequality, stating that, I quote, hence otherness and inequality will by nature be concomitant, especially since the number 2 is the first otherness and the first inequality. Now, I have already proved that by nature equality precedes inequality. Hence, it also precedes otherness. Therefore, equality is eternal. End of quotation. Cusa follows theory, making clear that the principle of alterity is number 2, since alterity always implies two things, a duality. Nevertheless, while for Gundissalinus this duality is the ontological duality of matter and form, which in turn are the ontological expression of possible being, Cusa's theory of matter presented in Deducta Ignorantia is radically different. His theory is grounded upon the crucial identification of matter with possibility. All ancient thinkers agreed that there must be an absolute possibility for the things to be, since nothing comes forth from nothing. This possibility is matter, which is the possibility of being of everything, being the potency of everything which will be actualized in it. For the ancient philosopher, then, matter appeared to be an absolute possibility. They discussed its being through different approaches, and Cusa presents these approaches in a short but fascinating doxography. There, Cusa is implicitly identifying three main traditional concepts, which are very close but slightly and fundamentally different within the tradition: matter, possibility, and potency. The link between the former and the latter is a topos of the philosophical tradition since Aristotle. Matter is in potency, while the form is in act and actualizes the compound, and indeed Aristotle often uses the two terms in a quite synonymic way. Possibility, though, implies something else. Indeed, with possibilitas we find at least two non-univocal meanings within the tradition: possibility as the existential possibility to be and not to be, which is a correlated meaning of potency, and possibility as power to do and not to do, that is, a synonym of potestas, power. Cusa was surely well aware of the duplicity of meaning of this term, and his development of the discussion follows this sort of ambiguity. In fact, applying the principle of maximum absolutum to this matter of possibility, Cusa makes clear that absolute possibility cannot correspond to matter, and he says so following two considerations. First, that the absolute possibility contains the totality of everything as possibility. Second, and more importantly, that being matter absolute possibility, it would entail that a maximum does exist in the created universe, which is impossible as the universe is the realm of plus et minus. Consequently, being a maximum, absolute possibility as well as absolute act and absolute potency are only in God, in the modus essendi proper to God. The possibility we refer to as matter, then, is the contracted possibility which descends from God, radically different from him. It is not an absolute but a determined possibility, the potentiality to be something, a position which will be further problematized by Cusa in his further works. It is time to draw some conclusions. The short examination hopefully displayed that Gundissalinus and Cusa may have some point in common, but their perspectives are focused on and developed in completely different directions. Gundissalinus reverses a topos of the tradition, the actuality of form, to give more consistency to his model development of universal isomorphism. The outcome is a theory of matter and form grounded upon one of the main concerns characterizing Gundissalinus' reflection: how to properly establish the ontological difference between God and universe, a difference which was meant to be radical, but at the same time grounding a similarity into difference through which the causative priority of God's creation could be justified. This difference is expressed by the distance between God's necessary existence and the creature's existential possibility, the crucial doctrine he received from Avicenna. The similarity is the unity proper to any existing thing, which is absolute in God and derived in the creatures, for every one of them has a unity made out of the duality of matter and form. By this point of view, Nicola of Cusa partially shares the same aims. Cusa too wanted to explain the similarity into difference existing between God and the universe through the dynamic of the contractio of the word from God, a process by which the universe is other than God, but yet it preserves something of its divine origin. The claim that absolute possibility and absolute potency are in God in his own way therefore echoes much more another philosopher working at the end of the 12th century rather than Gundissalinus. I'm referring to David of Dinan. Both Cusa and David propose theophanic descriptions of the institution of the universe, and the position of matter as the substrate of the instantiation of any corporeal being supposedly led David to state that matter and nous, which is the equivalent of matter for spiritual beings, are to be identified with God. Not a pantheism, but a theophany inspired by Eurygenes, Dionysius, and Honorius of Autun. For Gundissalinus, a claim such as that proposed by Nicola of Cusa would be inadmissible. God cannot be absolute possibility, as for Gundissalinus, following Avicenna, possibility always means that existential possibility to be, and crucially, not to be. Therefore, God cannot be said to be in potency or in act, these ontological characteristics would limit God's existence. To the contrary, for Nicolas of Cusa, any claim that possibility and potency per se are matter would imply that matter is not only co-eternal, but also ontologically coexistent with God, in this way limiting his existence. Cusa's concepts of potency and possibility are marked by a certain degree of positivity, a possibility to. For him, the absolute possibility is the possibility to be anything, while for Gundissalinus, possibility is predominantly a negative possibility, as possibility to be nothing. In conclusion, we might notice that both Gundissalinus and Nicolas of Cusa depart from theory of Chartres, trying to address in different and somewhat opposed ways the theories proposed by the Chartrean master. By many points of view, Gundissalinus' doctrinal fusion of Avicenne and Avicebron seems to develop the lines drawn by theory. But it is certainly Nicolas of Cusa who, 3 centuries later, would construct upon this basis a whole new philosophical world. Thank you very much for your attention.